I'm Debbie Peterson, and this is Corruption Chronicles. These are accounts of true life stories of people who have lived with government corruption and found ways to fix it. Today, we're going to be talking with Dr. Stead, who has an amazing story about the Titanic. His family in England and also in the United States have discovered that an ancestor who sailed on the Titanic was perhaps the reason it sank. So we'll be talking about that and also about that same ancestor, William Stead, who was English, published a newspaper, and was an investigative journalist. That same ancestor, William Stead, in 1905, did an incredible expose that shook Victorian England. It was an expose about the child sex trafficking that was going on at the time. Dr. Stead has done some research on that. He has a book coming out on both things, and he's doing some lecturing on the child sex trafficking and how to identify it. And we talked with his son in another podcast about the work that he was doing with children in the projects in Los Angeles. So without saying anything more and not giving away all the secrets, I'm going to introduce to you LJ's father, Loring Stead. Thank you for joining us today, Loring.
Hey, Team Corruption Chronicles and Deb Peterson, really appreciate being invited today. And you are highlighting things in America that needs to be talked about that people a lot of times don't like to talk about. There's evil scurrying around under rocks, and I love what you're doing. You're flipping over the stones, throwing the light on the evil, and doing what we should be doing. So thank you for this effort.
Thanks. And I just wanted to say about that, you know, whenever you're working on government corruption, if you discover it, then it's never one person who fixes it. It's a community. It takes a whole community. One of the things I say is that it takes a village to raise a town. And that's really the case with corruption. So you and I are both shining a light on some things, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people in the background who are working to make things right also.
Absolutely.
So thank you for your work.
Well, thank you for the introduction on my kin and branches of the same tree is W.T. Stead. And he has a life that really is emblematic of trying to reveal the abhorrent evil that's going on in the world since shortly after Adam and Eve. Childhood sex trafficking, literally, as you start digging into it, the further back you go, you find out the further back you can go. There's really no beginning except the beginning. So every time I research it more, I find out more and more about it. So I'm trying to learn as much as possible. Well, WT, to highlight his life, he was in 1885 was the editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, which was the one of the most, if not the most influential paper in London. He was only 34 at the time. He edited, I think, from 1883 to 1889. And he was given credit for being the patriarch of investigative journalism. And anything I talk about today, don't believe me, do your own research, go to Wikipedia, doing some digging. And as we all know now in the Wikipedia world, don't take one source, take multiple sources, source the sources and do your homework. So we can't spoon feed any things on corruption, but we just want to help you lift the stone open a little bit. And as those little insects try to scamper away, let's highlight some of those. Well, WT tried to do that. So think of this. He was in the middle of the Victorian age. Victorian age was kind of 1840 to 1900. And London at the time absolutely did not want to talk about anything like childhood sex trafficking. But we don't do that. There's no way we could be involved in that. Well, Stead, through his investigative journalism, found out that wasn't the case, that they were ultimately involved. The West End of London literally was only a few blocks from the East End of London. And who is the big guy in the East End of London, we all found out? Jack the Ripper. Stead broke stories on Jack the Ripper. So Stead really was the one who tried to drive home the thought of not just reporting the news, but actually accenting the news to the point that maybe journalism could drive government to take better actions. And one of the actions he and many others, he was one of a part of a team, was to drive the reality to London that bad things were going on. And he wrote many books. One he wrote, The Maiden Tribute. He didn't write this. Grace Eckley wrote this book. Please reference that. But this actually looks like my son, LJ Stead. He's got a beard, deep set blue eyes. When you ever see LJ, this is what WT looked like. So that's a book on him. This is also a great book he wrote, If Christ Came to Chicago. This is big stuff. And why this is interesting, he literally went down on the Titanic. And we're going to reveal why I feel that was the case in just a minute here. But
could I interrupt you for just a second, Dr. Stead? I agree with you completely about the digging. The more you dig, the more you find. It wasn't something I understood until I started digging. Yeah. And I also want to say to the people who are listening that before I had Dr. Stead on this show, I actually did it. I took a look at what you were telling me, and to make sure I could verify it, the people, the times, the places, exactly the things that you're telling our viewers to do. And just so folks know, we're not doing a podcast here of people who have conspiracy theories. We're doing a podcast here about people who have uncovered real events and taken action to do something about them. So Dr. Stead isn't just, as they say in Scotland, havering. This is the real deal. And you are a real doctor as well. So thank you. I just wanted to let folks know that.
Yeah, well, just like you say, I think when you hear the word conspiracy, you go, oh, that's not true. They're just making that up. We wish that was the case. We wish on many conspiracies, yes, that can't be the case. And then as you start digging, you go, really? Oh my goodness, that is the case. And that was what WT was all about. Well, literally, so in 1885, he started digging in to what was going on in Eastern London, eastern part of London, which literally was only blocks away. And he was finding out through his contacts he was fed a lot of information through politicians, clergy, businessmen, friends, locals. There's something up under the underbelly here that is wrong. And as he started digging into that, he started to say to himself, I got to prove this. What can I do to prove this? So he actually went through the process, started to learn about it, took several years to learn about the process. And he went to the point of being so passionate about this, he was going to delve fully into it, knowing that if he revealed the underbelly, he might have to pay a price for this, of which he ultimately did, because he revealed so much about it. He had to do prison time, because when he revealed that, yes, you could go to Eastern London, you could purchase a young person. We always think of ladies, but it's also boys, both then and now. And we're going to go into the and now later in this podcast. But you could purchase somebody, bring them kind of across into West London, have a sex slave. And this was terrible. And he proved it through what's called actual person, Eliza Armstrong. And having done this, chronicled it, wrote about it. Once he did that, West London was just an uproar. They're going, oh my God, this is true. But this guy that revealed it, he knows way too much. He must have done it. He had to be a bad guy. And you probably, too, in your revealing, they go, oh, yeah. Oh, they know so much about it. They had to be involved. Only involved to the point of, we're here to reveal and shine the spotlight. So as he shone the spotlight on it, he then was later convicted because he did such a great job of, he had to know so much. He literally did several months in prison for it, but was willing to do that. And in doing that, he was actually with a team able to affect English law and therefore American law. In 1885, they have a criminal act that later was dubbed the Stead Act, that brought age of consent from 12 and 13, I think 13 at the time, up to 16, which still seemed like a tragedy, but that was a huge movement at the time, up to 16, and really formulated and made some changes that even go into our legislation now with statutory rape. But England at the time, this took decades, because at one time, consent went down to 12 11 and 10. So it was, you could be consensual at 10 to 12 years of age. How sick is that? How sick is that?
Mm-hmm.
But his portion was the Stead law. Google it. It brought it from 12 and 13 up to 16. He made a lot of enemies. Anybody that starts revealing corruption, you are going to make a lot of enemies. And people that were pulling on the same rope and rowing on the same oar, you thought that were friends, behind the scenes might not be the case. Did you ever find that in your revealing of your corruption chronicles?
Yeah, and that's something I wanted to cut in on. In fact, I had the same conversation with a friend last night who's Ukrainian, and obviously this is the time where the Ukraine has just been invaded by Russia, for folks who are listening. And she's telling me that the people in Russia don't know what's going on because they're cut off and they don't get access to what's going on. And so she watches Russian television and she watches Ukrainian television, and they're two completely different stories. Mm-hmm. And the point I'm making, and she said 70% of the people in Russia support the invasion of the Ukraine. However, 30% don't, and there might be more, but they're afraid. And that's what we see in our own country. It's not limited to communist Russia, or I guess they're not communist now, whatever they are. It's not limited to Russia and other countries that we see as being not like us and not democracies. And there are really, I think, 3 or 4 different kinds of people. You get the people like they were in London at first. Oh, I can't believe this. This couldn't be me. This couldn't be us. That could never happen. And I certainly had that reaction myself when I first found it. And I've had other former mayors of the city saying, I just don't want to believe it. And that really is your first reaction. You don't want to believe that about a place that you love and care about. And so that's one reaction that probably we all have. Second reaction is there are a lot of people who are just oblivious. And that's probably most people, simply oblivious. They just don't know. They're just not listening. They're just not paying attention. They're just not receiving those messages. And then there are the folks who are scared.
And that's not to their detriment. They're just busy in their own lives.
It's not a criticism. Mm-hmm. Yep. It's a fact. Yeah,
absolutely.
And then the fourth are those who dig in and go after it. And absolutely, as one of my friends said to me, what would someone do to protect themselves from being discovered or uncovered or charged with a crime? And that gets difficult. Mm. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and then I think you've already experienced it. As W.T. Stead, he predicted his own death. He said because of the things he knew, he was either going to be lynched or drowned. Isn't that interesting that he said that? And I think you felt a little pushback. And I think I am going to feel a little pushback.
I think you will.
If you do too good a job, I already say to my wife, and I hope it's not the case, but if ever we're T-boned by a big truck by an intersection in the middle of the night, I was doing my job. And Stead felt that too. When he was going down, he was on a plank, frozen with John J. Astor's best friend and richest man in the world at that point. And he knew this was going to happen. And he was content with it because he understood the mission wasn't ending. The mission was just beginning. It's up to you and me to take those corruption things, build on our shoulders to the next generation to move it, to try to minimize, if not eradicate, these terrible things. Well, you are mature enough to know you're never going to totally eradicate it, but by golly, when it's going on in our lifetime, let's do everything to make it as hard as we can on those types of people. We really want to flip those stones as many, and as they scurry out, we want the light on them. So Stead was coming to America at the request of President Taft to do a present on peace. Stead was a world-known guy as a peace advocate. He had been in the States 7, 9 times, I don't know. Even before that, as a fun note, he had come at the request of William Randolph Hearst to tell him about what's this new investigative journalism? What's this all about? Mm-hmm. Well, if anybody knows about the Hearsts, they were like the original Murdochs in the sense that they owned newspapers, very influential, and went on to really influence government in America in the future. Some would say good, some would say bad, but a lot of those techniques were learned by WT. So WT really got the credit for a lot of that. So WT, his claim to fame is he brought the Stead law to fruition to highlight the point that we got to do more than we are. And I do have to say, in doing that, one of his techniques was to snap the people into action who you highlighted, who are so involved in their own life. This isn't going to mean anything to me. So he found out you got to have a call to action by the headline. And listen to a couple of his headlines I brought out that think how radical this was in 1880. This would be like reading National Enquirer now, and you didn't even want to go there. But if that got done what it needed to get done, it worked, and it did for him. And one of his headlines was "Violation of Virgins." What can you imagine that? Strapping girls down. What? That was so beyond the pale. You can see why he was ostracized by many, but at the same time, this snapped the population to the reality of, hey, listen up. This is something big. This is something big. So that's a claim to fame that literally helped the idea of having journalism coax government to do the right thing.
Yes, didn't he had a name for it, didn't he? Didn't he call it journalism or government by journalism or government by the press or something like that?
You're dead spot on. He was giving credit for being the founder of government by journalism, investigative journalism. Some would perjurize it by saying yellow journalism. But I think with that, you can do a lot of good things, and he has. And
about the same time that he was doing that in England, there was also a movement here, and they called it muckraking. And then it kind of died out. It died out in the early 1900s, and we really didn't see as much of it here until the 1970s, when Woodward and Bernstein from the Washington Post started talking with the chap they called Deep Throat, who turned in Nixon, basically. And that was a huge public service they did.
Absolutely huge public service. So that's great that there are those folks around that are willing to risk their careers and maybe even some of their lives sometimes. There's some recent people in journalism who mysteriously have been found dead. And I'll let people do their own digging on that. I'm not going to perjurize it by saying this or that, but do your own digging. We aren't going to spoon feed you. That's the beauty of a podcast like this. It'll inspire you to read about it, talk about it more, and to and make your own way in it. I think it's a good thing. What you're doing is wonderful.
So tell me about what's happening with what happened. Now you're saying he thought he would die by drowning, but many people on the Titanic died by drowning. So what's the significance of him saying, predicting his own demise?
Yeah, well, two things. Well, one, several years prior to that, he wrote a book about a boat that would hit an iceberg that would go down, and the main person would be died. And that was him. And then specific to this, he knew these things. And to lead into the book called Sink the Unsinkable that dove me further into studying the Titanic, that led us to talking, what if the sinking of the Titanic was no accident? The sinking of the unsinkable. And I'll reveal through oral tradition information we've been passed down that there was 5 people on that boat they wanted dead. 5 of those were, one, W.T. Stead, because of his knowledge of childhood sex trafficking. It was leaked by somebody, a friend of his, that they knew he was coming to America not just to speak at Carnegie Hall at the request of the President Taft on peace, but also he was there to name names. So there was many involved in childhood sex trafficking in politics at local, state, and national level, congressmen, senators, clergy, businessmen, that if he came to America and named names, the Harvey Epsteins or Harvey Weinsteins of the world and Jim Epsteins of the world were done. So they developed a plan to stop that boat. And I'll tell you that in just a minute. But first, I'm going to tell you the other 4 people that were on the boat that they wanted down. They wanted Stead's best friend was John J. Astor, richest man in the world. The Strauss family, who's the Macy family of Macy's furniture, and Guggenheim of the museum and whatnot. And then, so those 3 families had to come down. Why? They were against America coming off the gold standard and going to this new concept called the Federal Reserve. So there were certain families, hold it, I'm making a correction in my computer. You can see this raw, real, and unrehearsed. We are the real thing. This is it. If they came to America, they were going to be able to prevent what eventually did happen in 1913. Made the audience read up on Jekyll Island. There was families in America and Europe that ended up making the Federal Reserve. So research that. So those 3 had to go. Stead had to go. And then a 5th interesting one that I will reveal in the book, and I'll detail it much further in the book, was a personal emissary from Taft sent to the Vatican to get information, i.e. dirt on Wilson, who was going to be his competitor in the presidential election. Well, what was that information? We know now, but we didn't then, but I'll reveal it. He was a racist. And from that, if that was been widely known, he probably never would have been elected. So if this boat would have gotten to America, America would be vastly different today. Vastly different today. So how that came about is the word got out to this ilk of bad, evil people that the boat was coming. We have to come up with a plan to do something to alter these guys from coming. And the plan was this: you couldn't sink the unsinkable. It was unsinkable. You couldn't sink it. So the plan was devised by a cadre of people, about 8 of them, to injure the boat on its way over by hitting an iceberg, which could be done. They were going through an iceberg field. They knew that was inevitable. They knew where the ice fields were, not far from Halifax. They knew if they did a partial injury to the boat, they would need to, iceberg's going to hit it below observational area. They would have to, only under safety reasons, go into the closest port, which would be Halifax at the time, and take a couple days assessing.
And that's in Nova Scotia. So they didn't have to limp back to England. They would be closer to Canada then.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I've been to Halifax. I'm trying to do my due diligence on the book. And Halifax has a real tight association with the history of the Titanic now. They have a beautiful museum there. Many people from the Titanic are buried there. So if you have a chance, please go to Halifax, if nothing else, to see the beauty of the place. But if you can dig in on the Titanic too, check it out. So they were going to limp back to Halifax. In fact, that's where many of the dead were taken anyway. It was the closest. And once in Halifax, the people would have probably been there a day or two. They would have disembarked, and it would have been far easier to then. There was people placed there to kill these 5 people. They couldn't really do it in London and New York. They were bustling with constables, and all these folks were in Halifax. It was a real quiet town at the time. Would have been easily done. So that was the plan. Well, as most plans for humans, it went awry. They hit this thing, and then it started to sink. And whoa, they never thought it was going to sink. And in the sinking, totally different plans arose. Now they have a problem on their hands, because now they've killed not only these 5, they've killed over 1,500. This was even unthinkable for this sick group of people. So it was brutal. So in digging through that, I have uncovered a lot passed down through oral tradition. And it's a wonderful process.
So when you say through oral tradition, are you saying you still have relatives in the United Kingdom, in England?
Yes, great question. How we cross with WT is the Stead ancestry came from Sweden to Emblenton, England, and LJ and I were going to go over there till COVID hit, but we will probably hit there shortly. I think we'll actually hit there before the release of Sink the Unsinkable, my book. And this book has taken much longer because of the depth of WT's writings, his editorials, his books that he wrote. So I'm trying to do him justice. So we cross paths and start paths, the branches of the same tree and same kin in Emblenton. Well, his branch, he went on to Howden. Some other Steads went on to Howden, ultimately to London. And in London is where the editorial whole process started. But how he really had the passion that really started it, I think, that led him to be leading a life of doing everything he could to challenge the current state of affairs in England, was his father was a congregational pastor in Emblenton, and his mom was just a devout congregationalist. And congregationalists, every time I research WT, I go, now what's a congregationalist? And they were Protestants, which I did know, but they were Calvinists, and they really looked at the Bible as the Word of God. And from that, even his dad was heard to say, they called him Boy Billy, and they would go, Boy Billy, you don't have to cure all the ills of the world yourself. Can you leave a little for Christ? So even at a young age, he was just dead set to cure the ills of the world. Where I pick it up, I grew up in Harmony and Canton, Minnesota, just south of Rochester, Minnesota, where I am now. They're about an hour south. And from about 5 to 10 years of age, I always heard the stories of Boy Billy. Well, in oral tradition, many people have families, you hear about the crazy uncle or whatever, and you hear all these things. I heard many horse thief stories too on the other side of the family. But this Boy Billy who went down on this ship, never thought too much about it, except I heard hundreds of stories. Literally, we would leave church at the Scottish Rite Presbyterian Church in Canton, Minnesota, and afterwards invariably go out to Shorty and Bernice's, which was just north and east of Canton on the back road to Lenora, Minnesota. This is now Amish country, and we'd hear hundreds and hundreds of stories. And I heard of this about this guy, Boy Billy. Didn't think much about it until now I'm a freshman at Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, the original first Norwegian college in America. And our assignment in this Paideia course, which was seeking knowledge, it was kind of a mix of English and history, research your family. Oh, okay, well, I'll start researching the Steads. And in researching that, I found out repeatedly this guy, W.T. Stead. And I go, oh, W.T., is that a relative? Because the surname Stead is very small. S-T-E-A-D is not a common Stead in England. It's S-T-E-D, S-T-E-E-D. So S-T-E-A-D all of a sudden takes it down to about 2,000 surnames, very small group. And directly related, you were asking about the heritage over there now. LJ and I, as much as we can, since we weren't able to get over there, we Zoom WT's current only existing grandson, Clive. So we Zoom with his grandson, Clive. I think it's grandson or great grandson. Maybe LJ can correct me on that, but we do interact with direct relatives.
I do think it's great grandson, I believe.
Okay.
But it's truest direct lineage. Absolutely. Bloodline. Yes.
So what's been fun, he's been able to collaborate and corroborate with me stories I already heard. And then what was fun with when I dug into this WT thing, I'm going, oh, WT, that's interesting. I'll dig into that more. I read about it. I go, WT went down on the Titanic. William T. William's Boy Billy. So Boy Billy is W.T. Stead. And the more I read in these books, only corroborate stories I already knew. And what's most interestingly, I'm going to be able to build on those stories that others didn't know. And not only from Emblenton on to London, but London up to Clive current day, and then even off the ship of the Titanic. Well, Doc Stead, how can you do that? Would you go back in time? No. What was interestingly new on the Titanic was something privy to our cell phones today. And what was that? The telegraph. The telegraph was on there. And the telegraph was like the Marconi system. I don't think it was it wasn't the only one out there, because they tried to get a hold of the Carpathian, some of the out there, but it was kind of a new generation of this new thing that they could, in real time almost, send messages. Well, we were sent some messages to family and friends not previously revealed. So that is some real-time investigative journalism on this part that were just passed down through the family. So really, I'm not revealing anything new to the world. I guess it is new to the world. It's not new to our family. We've known it for years. And as great-great-grandpa Ed Stead would say, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. And then Alvy, his son, LJ's great-grandpa, would always say, all being said, I could be wrong. That's the truth in any oral tradition. That said, I haven't really found anything in the books that doesn't collaborate with what I already know. Like some will go, well, what's your reference? What book is that? Oral tradition. I don't have to, like, I've read all these books, and it's like they have hundreds and hundreds of references. And once again, I'd go to Grace Eckley, who was a emeritus down at Drake, and she had that great book, Maiden Tribute, which is a reference to Stead's book, Maiden Tribute to Babylon. So she referenced him many times, but my references are oral tradition. I heard these stories. Who am I to say the right? Who am I to say the wrong? But it's really interesting as you start reading them in multiple sources and going, this is exactly the way we heard it. So,
well, I think it's particularly interesting that you had your lineage here in the United States, and there was an oral tradition passed down. And then when you went to the other side of the family over in England that remained there, they had an oral tradition, and the two oral traditions had the same stories, which
absolutely.
To me is a great corroboration. Not only that, but they actually have perhaps some physical evidence as well in the families. Do you think some of the other families that he believed, or that you think may have been the subject, we'll call it a hit, a subject of a hit, do you think that any of them would have oral traditions or might come forth with any information?
Yeah. That is a great question, because the conspiracy that those three families were to be taken out is not new. That is not new, but that they were to be taken out on the Titanic on that particular journey and tying them in is new. So that is part of LJ and my new journey, is to try to start reaching out to some of those families and to see what they heard, to see what they know, and to further collaborate what is going on. So I hope is some of these, I don't have access to those folks now, and maybe somebody that's listening to this, a friend of a friend of a friend, can have them reach out to us, because I'd love to discuss what we know with them. And those are names that you can find. I would love to see if anybody can collaborate the person sent to the Vatican. I think that would be really interesting. And some would go, well, why to the Vatican? Why would somebody send somebody over to the Vatican? And I can just tell you from tradition, this I don't know, just from what I've heard, is the Vatican at the time was the original Interpol. It was the original CIA. It was the original investigative spot. Unbelievable. And why is that? That sounds odd. Well, let's say humans are humans. We know that there's good humans, there's bad humans, and there's some evil humans. And there's sainted humans, but let's take some evil humans. Let's say I was a up and coming bishop in Philadelphia, and I don't know that's the story at all where it's from, but let's say I was, and you get behind the little confessional, and we open the curtain, and you go, "Bless me, Father, I have sinned. This is what I did," and some of those things were marked corruption, maybe even murder, and the most unbelievable sin, I think, of childhood sex trafficking. So the guy shuts the little curtain, he gives him his penitence, what he has to do, but that maybe bishop to be would say, you know what, this is some valuable information. I'm going to send it on to the Vatican. And why is that? Why would I send it to the Vatican? I want to continue to move up in the Catholic Church. And I think the Catholic Church is a wonderful spot, but if there's humans involved, there can be some corruption in politics, in church. The book also will reference the Masons. My dad was a Mason, and he was a great guy, and many of these guys were, but I think there was some corruption maybe in the Masons too. So the Vatican Church would collect all this information with the payoff maybe in the future of, you know what, this guy in Philadelphia has been sending us a lot of information. We're going to keep him going up in the church. But what happens, it was a reference point to those who had access and money can contact the Vatican and maybe get some information on people that others didn't know and use it to their advantage. And let's think of that even today. Jeff Epstein, think of how he was protected by politics, protected by the powerful, protected by everything, even when accused and in the stream of a jurisdiction that he should have been prosecuted earlier in his career. They bypassed it. And even at the end, the ultimate conspiracy, is he dead?
Yeah.
You know,
well, that's, yeah.
The cameras were off. Things have changed. Is he dead? But specifically back to this, then, the Vatican, some people in the Vatican use that information to glean money from others and help them out. And people in power, even to Jim Epstein today, were doing that. So everything old is new again. History doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but often it rhymes. And I'm hearing a lot of, I'm not a music expert, but I'm hearing a lot of rhymes in my ears.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because we met because I was working with the same organization you are to get my book out. And my book is The Happiest Corruption, and it's Sleaze, Lies, and Suicide in a California beach town. And
please get the book. It's excellent, by the way. It's excellent. I have read it now.
And one of the reasons that I looked into, or one of the things that happened to me is I started to research it, and similar to your experience was I started looking at my ancestors, and some of the lines we've got go way back. I mean, way back to 1200 in Scotland, but the Norwegians are harder to track. Although I've got probably more Norwegian blood than anything else, but
well, when you're rowing with the longboats all over the world and landing here and there, who knows? The only tradition was oral tradition.
Right. And one of the things I discovered, though, is that there are traits that come down through generations and generations. Is it in your DNA? Well, I guess ultimately it's in your DNA. But I read a letter that my grandfather had written that I could have written myself, and yet I had no idea he'd ever done that investigation into voter fraud in Kansas City, Missouri in the 1970s. And I read it, I was stunned because he sounded just like me, or I guess we need to say I sounded just like him. And I saw the edits in it, and there were little edits in it in my grandmother's writing. And my grandmother studied journalism in the early 1900s, which is very interesting. And it's just been so uncanny to me the way those things seem to follow through. My father, we didn't know until a few years ago, was an intelligence officer we knew he was in the reserves, but we didn't know he was an intelligence officer. We didn't know that for many, many, many years. I mean, probably 40 years after he left or more. And so some of those things come through. The rest of my family are all auditors. And so you take an investigator and an auditor and a journalist, and you got me.
Absolutely.
But the reason I'm going into all of that is because that really is the case with you, and I think you were moving toward that. But Stead actually gave you a mission, whether it was through your genes or whether it was something that you've just come across by the grace of God or whatever. you now have a mission with child sex trafficking. Can you tell us a little more about what you're working on there?
Absolutely. Well, you are dead spot on in exactly what you said. And I think it is in your genes. You many times when I read something W.D. Stead did, I literally could have wrote it, or LJ could have wrote it, just like you could have wrote it. And I would much rather in retirement be golfing with my friends down in Florida, or fishing the inland down in, I'm sorry, that'd be in Arizona, fishing in Florida. I have no choice. Like some will go, well, why are you a writer? I don't want to be a writer. I have to be. You don't have a choice. Now down that track, you know it. It's in your genes. You have to do it. So where childhood sex trafficking is, as people become aware of corruption and hopefully read my book, Sink the Unsinkable, and dive into our site. I want to also let you know through LJ, we have a site called titanictimes.org. titanictimes.org, and we'll be dropping many videos and trying to help others who've hit the icebergs of life. And hitting icebergs of life, being a childhood sex trafficker, or a health iceberg, or a relationship iceberg, or a financial iceberg, we're going to try to help you manipulate or massage and maneuver forward on your icebergs. Well, with this iceberg of childhood sex trafficking, the call to action is, Deb's doing the best thing ever. Podcasts to try to reveal and focus on bad things that are going on out there. And I want to reference now, if you could go, there's numerous sites now on childhood sex trafficking. I think one of the best sites I found is the Thorn site. And it's a fellow Midwesterner, Ashton Kirshner's from Iowa City, Iowa. And he has a site that really helps you take the next steps of what you can do in identifying who to alert and how to do it. And then on Deb's site too, you'll be able to go to an hour-long program I gave for physicians on how to help better identify childhood sex trafficked kids who might be in your practice. I probably missed dozens that I didn't know in my time. I saw like 220,000 patients and never identified, but we were never taught that. Now there are some keys that can be utilized to help you find that. And going to her site where the Corruption Chronicles, that she'll have reference where she'll catalog and library these podcasts, you'll be able to find that too. So I would go to the Thorn by Ashton Kirshner, great spot, lots of other good spots out there, and just start being aware that it's happening. It's happening in your neighborhood, and what you can do to maybe help root it out. So Deb, thank you for taking the time and having this podcast happen, because it's got to start somewhere, and you've started it. So thank you.
Well, so I want to make sure that everybody who's listening knows that all of the links you've mentioned on child trafficking, child sex trafficking, they will all be below this podcast. And also, eventually, I'm sure we'll be hearing about your book coming out, and we'll get some updates on that as we go along, and mine as well. Can you reiterate for us again? Now, you said that you gave a speech. Mm-hmm. Are you available to speak to organizations that would like to learn what you've learned?
Absolutely. Yep. If they reference us through titanictimes.org, we'll have the ability to probably Zoom into any organization and talk about that. And it can be as short and brief as 20 minutes. 20 minutes, you probably really at least need to give it good review. And I could go up to an hour or 2 hours. LJ and I, we have a team now on titanictimes.org that can literally come in and give 4 hours and a whole coaching service on this particular topic. And I forgot to mention, I'm not perfect, but I forgot to mention how raw and real it is now. They think 45 million people in the world right now are under slavery. Of a good portion of those is childhood sex trafficking. 45 million is the highest it's ever been. And there's 400,000 probably sex trafficked in America now. How could those numbers be going up? Think about how easy it is now if you're an evil person. You can find out about it through the internet. You can go deep into what's called 4chan and 8chan, which I don't know anything about, and don't go there, but it's like a bad spot. But I guess it's easy enough to do. And then you can pay for it through Bitcoin and all this currency stuff. So it's a sad reality of what's going on. Easier to do, but also guess what, bad guys? It's going to be easier to find you. We have a group of Debbie's heading this up, and LJ and I are on our team, and we're recruiting others. We're out to get you, and we will make it. We will highlight you. We will embarrass you. We will try to incarcerate you, and we will do everything to stop you.
Well, gosh, that sounds like a mission.
Thank you. We can't deny it. It's in our blood. We have to.
Yeah, that's right. That Viking spirit, because that you've got the Viking spirit too. So is there anything else you want to say to wrap up? Anything else that you think we need to let listeners know? Obviously, we can come back to it another time and get an update. But for now,
I think the take home is to not put your head in the sand and think, oh, this is something that doesn't exist in my little community. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be in a big city or medium-sized city. It's even in small cities. It's everywhere. And these programs are designed to help you be cognizant that it is going on. And if you take the call of action, what you can do to get involved and be part of the team to help stop this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So you can go to titanictimes.org, or you can come to the website where you found this podcast, and all that information will be there. And I want to say thank you to listening to everyone who's out there. And remember that together we are a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And it's our job to keep it honest. Thank you. And until next time.
Godspeed.